In this second part of our video essay, we will continue our exploration into the questions, where is A Nightmare on Elm Street set, and why is the Elm Street house Freddy's home? (1987's wildly successful sequel, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, was followed a year and a half later by the even more wildly successful A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, in August of 1988. A direct continuation of the plot and characters from Dream Warriors, The Dream Master sticks with the winning formula established by its predecessor and widens Freddy's deadly reach by expanding his victim pool from just the Elm Street children to virtually any and all of the teenagers in Springwood. Once again, the Elm Street house is presented as Freddy's home, both symbolically and at one point literally.
So, why the haunted house?
It's not just a house. It's his home. He's waiting in there for me to dream.
And while Kristen's cryptic claim isn't fully explained, one could interpret that the boarded-up wreck of a house on Elm Street is now a place of local legend, so connected to Freddy Krueger by reputation that it's now simply called his home. And we'll just ignore the fact that in Dream Warriors, Kristen told Nancy that 1428 Elm Street was just a house she dreamt about, implying that she had never seen it before in waking life.
I used to live in this house.
It's just a house I dream about.
What Nightmare 4 and 5 do that is interesting geographically is show the audience that Kristen and our new final girl and imminent dream master, Alice, do indeed actually live on Elm Street. In the scene where Kristen takes Alice, Dan, and Rick to see the Elm Street house, Kristen's mother pulls up in her car, presumably on her way home. We immediately recognize Brooke Bundy reprising her role from Part 3, repeatedly spouting her signature catchphrase, "Andale."
Andale! Andale! Andale!
She stops to yell at Kristen to get away from the house, clearly aware of its history. As she drives away, one must assume that the Elm Street house has to be on her way home. Why else would she be coincidentally driving down that particular street? Later in the film, when Alice wakes up from her shared dream with Kristen, she and her brother Rick live close enough to Kristen's house that they are able to quickly run there in the middle of the night. And to drive the point home, in A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, Alice mentions that Freddy's crimes happened
right here on Elm Street.
Getting back to Nightmare 4 and our quest for some indication that Springwood is a town in Ohio, while it isn't directly mentioned by any of the characters, eagle-eyed viewers will notice that the vehicles in the film, most noticeably on the ambulance in this scene, have Ohio license plates. Is it subtle? Yes. Would the average viewer blink and probably miss it? Yes. Does Springwood still look like the same Southern California neighborhood from the previous films? Yes. But there it is. The first noteworthy corroboration that Springwood is indeed a suburb of the Buckeye State.
I always wanted to be on TV. Maybe now they'll give me my own show.
On a more interesting note, neither the Freddy's Nightmares TV series, which premiered 2 months after the release of Nightmare 4 and ran for 2 seasons, nor the next entry in the feature film franchise, 1989's A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, make any mention of Springwood being in Ohio.
What is this place?
In fact, the Freddy's Nightmares TV series seems more inclined to position Springwood once again as a quirky Anytown, USA, possibly existing in its own spooky alternate reality, or at the very least, a distant corner of the Twilight Zone.
Oh, I was away.
Long trip. How'd you end up in Springwood? Is that anywhere or just nowhere?
It's somewhere in between.
And while even the handful of Freddy Krueger-oriented episodes of this syndicated horror anthology series aren't considered canon, the show was still produced and supervised by New Line Cinema, featured Robert Englund as Krueger, and put Springwood itself front and center.
That's because we got a very spooky ghost in Springwood.
Ooh, are you telling me that this town is haunted now?
Yes, by Freddy Krueger.
1989's A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, released almost exactly 1 year after Nightmare 4 hit theaters, is once again a direct sequel to the previous film, seeing the return of Dream Master Alice Johnson and boyfriend Dan Jordan. The sequel also dramatizes nightmare flashbacks to Amanda Krueger's sexual assault at the hands of the 100 maniacs in Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital. It's important to note that while Weston Hills was not visited or shown in Nightmare 4, the version of it visualized in The Dream Child is very different from what was shown in Nightmare 3. The structure itself appears as more of a gigantic Gothic asylum and is seemingly located either on the outskirts of town or actually outside of Springwood's city limits. This notion that Weston Hills lies somewhere outside of Springwood proper is also implied in 2003's Freddy vs. Jason. 1428 Elm Street makes its ominous Nightmare World appearances and is at one point once again referred to as Freddy's house.
He invited me to his house last night.
Outside of these mentions, we are 2 for 2 on the Nightmare franchise, simply labeling the Elm Street house as Freddy's home without any sort of clarification as to why anyone thinks that. But those clarifications would indeed be given in a fascinating and controversial series of retcons and revelations found in the 6th film in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, 1991's Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. Set 10 years after the events of The Dream Child, Freddy's Dead comes out of the gate with an Escape from New York-inspired computer screen graphic spelling out exactly where Springwood, Ohio is, as well as the supposedly final film's new narrative conceit. Springwood, Ohio is now presented as a surreal ghost town with its own rules, exaggerated dream logic, and loopy oddball characters. Freddy is completely out of victims, having apparently killed every child and teenager in town, and he desperately wants to escape the confines of Springwood's borders. The film includes a series of flashbacks filling in just about every unexplored gap in Freddy's history, along with some retroactive wrinkles added to things we thought we already knew. One of the biggest retcons, though it is not really treated as such, is the implication that Freddy Krueger once lived in the house at 1428 Elm Street before Donald and Marge Thompson moved in. He presumably inherited the house from his stepfather, whom he murdered as a teenager. We are shown, through the 3D eyes of Maggie Burrows, Freddy's memory of enjoying being physically abused by his drunken stepfather, played by Alice Cooper, in the basement of the Elm Street house. While this connection isn't made 100% clear in the film, the shooting draft of the screenplay bears it out, and the basement layout matches up with other flashbacks of adult Freddy living in the Elm Street house with his wife and young daughter years later. These basement and backyard flashbacks include another fascinating retcon, showing us that Freddy had a secret, never-before-seen murder room in the basement of the Elm Street house, where Freddy says he does his special work, complete with newspaper clippings, photos of his victims, dead animals, and lots of early or alternate attempts at Freddy's signature glove. A deleted scene included in a television cut of the film would have not only shown adult Maggie finding this room in the basement of 1428 Elm Street in the present day, but stating definitively,
This is Krueger's house.
It's worth mentioning, though it's probably coincidental, that there is a dream sequence in the original Nightmare on Elm Street where Nancy also finds a hidden door in the basement leading to Freddy's lair. Of course, in this version of the scene, like so many other instances throughout the franchise, the Nightmare version of the Elm Street house becomes a direct conduit to Freddy's boiler room, and not a physical basement murder room. And so, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, finally, and albeit retroactively, nails down 2 long-standing question marks in the franchise. Springwood is definitely in Ohio, and 1428 Elm Street was, at one time, literally Freddy's home. And in terms of Nightmare continuity, while 2003's long-awaited matchup movie, Freddy vs. Jason, doesn't really explore any new territory in terms of the subject of this essay, the movie should definitely be commended for sticking to previously established Elm Street lore, utilizing Springwood, Weston Hills, the Boiler Room, Hypnosil, creepy rope-skipping ghost kids, and their unnerving nursery rhyme. Freddy even drops a quip about his fixation on 1428 Elm Street.
I've always had a thing for the whores that live in this house.
If anything, Freddy vs. Jason avoids mentioning either Ohio or New Jersey altogether, to simplify the teen characters transporting Jason back to his slashing grounds for his grand battle royale with Freddy. The film glosses over Springwood, Ohio's geographical distance from Crystal Lake, New Jersey, which would be a drive that would take at least 8 or 9 hours. And quite frankly, this isn't all that big of a nitpick. It is interesting to note that if the filmmakers behind A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 had also retained the detail that Alone in the Dark's Springwood was a town in New Jersey, Freddy vs. Jason's geographical complication would have been solved right off the bat, as it would have conveniently placed Springwood in the same state as Jason's stomping grounds. Just think, Camp Crystal Lake could very well have been the Elm Street Children's local summer camp.
There's this monster.
dream. What's your name?
Nancy.
We won't open the can of worms surrounding rejected screenplays for Freddy vs. Jason, which include the retcon that Freddy was once a camp counselor at Crystal Lake. One could argue that the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, applauded for its imagination, creativity, and audaciousness, had the longevity and impact that it had because it could explore so many different aspects of its world. Perhaps Elm Street is the poster child for how retroactive continuity can keep a horror film series thriving, adding new details and untold backstory to facets we assumed we already knew, and augmenting earlier established continuity with fresh, unexpected layers and revelations. And for one final note about where A Nightmare on Elm Street is set in Freddy's house, let's backtrack a bit. Outside of continuity, back to the ambitiously meta sequel from 1994, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Released 3 years after Freddy's dead, the franchise's supposed final chapter, Wes Craven's New Nightmare is actually a postmodern commentary on the Freddy phenomenon and the franchise as a whole. The idea being that Freddy is actually an ageless, ancient, evil entity, kept alive through folklore, but contained in the celluloid tales told in the Elm Street films. And keeping that in mind, Wes Craven makes 2 very sly, very subtle back-to-back creative choices in one of the movie's signature scenes, details that might reveal just what Craven really thought of the franchise's sequel retcons and expanded mythology. Towards the end of the film, Heather Langenkamp, playing herself, realizes that she once again has to play Nancy and confront Freddy on his own turf. She comes to this realization while having a desperate conversation with a disbelieving John Saxon, also playing himself, as he unconsciously transforms into the character of Lieutenant Donald Thompson from one second to the next. As confused as Heather is, she only accepts the reality of what's happening once she sees the policeman's badge on his belt. It's only a brief glimpse, but if one were to freeze the frame and look closely, they'd see that Thompson's lieutenant's badge has a very recognizable insignia on it, as well as 2 very distinct words engraved on it, and they aren't Springwood, Ohio. And as Lieutenant Thompson drives away, Heather turns, now in Nancy's pajamas, taking things back to the beginning, back to the first nightmare. And she's no longer outside her own house. She's been magically transported, and we know it's coming, and we're eagerly anticipating the reveal, as the familiar notes of Charles Bernstein's Elm Street theme swell on the soundtrack, and we do see that she's once again standing outside 1428 Elm Street, Los Angeles, California. What color is the front door?